The elegant restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation and the soft clinking of silverware against fine china. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the white tablecloths and neatly arranged cutlery. The place was a haven for the elite. Business magnates, celebrities, and high-profile executives often dined here, enjoying exquisite meals prepared by world-class chefs. At one of the corner tables, a frail elderly woman in a faded wool coat sat quietly, her eyes scanning the menu with slight hesitation. Her presence was out of place in this establishment, where every guest exuded wealth and power. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the menu, her fingers rough from years of hard work. A young, well-groomed waiter approached her table, his neatly pressed uniform reflecting the restaurant standards. He took one look at the woman, noting her worn-out attire, the age-old purse sitting beside her, and the shoes that had seen far better days. A flicker of disapproval crossed his face, but he masked it with a practiced, polite smile. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, though his tone was anything but welcoming. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" The elderly woman hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the menu. She had saved every penny to experience this meal, a rare treat she had gifted herself after years of sacrifice. "I'd like to order something simple," she said gently. The waiter's smile thinned. "Perhaps I should recommend something more affordable? We have a small cafe across the street that might be more suitable." A few guests at nearby tables overheard the exchange, their gazes flickering toward the woman with curiosity, some with amusement, others with quiet judgment. The woman's face fell slightly, and she glanced down, suddenly feeling out of place. At that moment, the restaurant's large wooden doors opened, and Bill Gates walked in. Dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, the billionaire philanthropist entered with his usual modesty, his presence commanding respect without effort. He was a frequent guest at the restaurant, known not just for his wealth, but for his generosity and humility. As he passed through, he caught sight of the scene unfolding at the corner table. His sharp mind processed everything in an instant. The discomfort on the woman's face, the barely concealed disdain in the waiter's expression, the quiet judgment from the guests nearby. For a brief moment, Bill paused. Then, with calm certainty, he changed direction and walked straight toward the elderly woman's table. The restaurant fell silent. No one had expected this. The waiter's expression faltered as he stepped aside, unsure of what was about to happen. Bill Gates pulled out a chair and sat down across from the elderly woman, offering her a warm smile. "Good evening," he said. "I hope you don't mind some company." The woman's eyes widened, recognition dawning on her face. "Mr. Gates, Bill waved a hand dismissively. "Please, just call me Bill." The waiter stood frozen, unsure of what to do. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sir, can I get you something?" Bill didn't take his eyes off the woman as he spoke. "I'll have whatever the lady is having." The tension in the air was palpable. Every guest in the restaurant was watching, stunned by what they were witnessing. The elderly woman hesitated before speaking. I haven't ordered yet. I wasn't sure." "Then let's choose together," Bill said, flipping open the menu. "I've eaten here 100 times, but I'd love to try something new." The woman's eyes filled with gratitude and disbelief, but she smiled. For the first time that evening, she felt seen. The waiter, now visibly nervous, rushed to take their order, suddenly realizing the gravity of his mistake. As the restaurant's elite watched the scene unfold, it became clear that this was no ordinary dinner. It was a lesson, and everyone in that room was about to learn it. The hushed whispers of the restaurant's elite filled the air as Bill Gates and the elderly woman browsed the menu together. The once dismissive waiter now stood at attention, his posture stiff as he waited for their order. His earlier smugness had vanished, replaced by discomfort and quiet panic. The woman, still hesitant, glanced at the menu, her fingers trembling slightly. She had spent years sacrificing her own wants, ensuring that her children and grandchildren had everything they needed. A fancy dinner in a place like this had never been an option. And yet, here she was, sitting across from one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the world. Bill Gates, ever patient, noticed her hesitation. He set his menu down and smiled reassuringly. "How about we start with something simple?" he suggested. "I hear the chef here makes an incredible vegetable soup. What do you think?" The woman looked up, meeting his kind eyes, and smiled. "That sounds wonderful." Bill turned to the waiter, who quickly scribbled the order down. "We'll have 2 bowls of the chef's special soup, followed by the house steak. Medium rare for me, and however the lady prefers hers." The waiter nodded, his usual arrogance nowhere to be found. "Of course, sir." He hurried off, eager to escape the tension he had created. The restaurant's other guests tried to act natural, but their eyes kept flicking toward the unusual scene at the corner table. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing how quickly social hierarchy could shift. The same woman they had dismissed just moments ago was now the most important guest in the room. A well-dressed man at a nearby table, a hedge fund manager who had spent years rubbing shoulders with the rich and powerful, leaned over to his companion. "I've never seen Gates do anything like this," he muttered, shaking his head. His companion, a luxury fashion executive, nodded slowly. "This is a masterclass in humility. That waiter is going to remember this moment for the rest of his life." Across the table, the elderly woman took a sip of her water and set the glass down carefully. "I never thought I'd see the day where I'd share a meal with Bill Gates," she said, still in disbelief. "I've read so much about you, all the things you've done for people. And now, here you are, having dinner with me." Bill chuckled lightly. "You know," he said, "I grew up in a household where my parents taught me that success isn't just about wealth. It's about how you treat people. You can be the richest man in the room, but if you don't have kindness, what do you really have?" The woman nodded slowly. "I always believed that, too. When I was younger, I worked as a teacher. The pay wasn't great, but I always tried to help my students in any way I could. Some of them didn't have food to eat, so I'd bring extra lunch. Some didn't have good clothes, so I'd sew for them." Bill leaned forward, listening intently. "And do you know where those students are now?" The woman's eyes sparkled with emotion. "One of them became a doctor, another a lawyer, and one became a teacher, just like me." She paused. "I guess I didn't realize it until now, but kindness, it always comes back around, doesn't it?" Bill nodded. "It does. You gave them what you could when they needed it most. And today, life gave something back to you." Their conversation was interrupted as the food arrived. 2 steaming bowls of rich, fragrant soup placed in front of them, followed by perfectly plated steaks. As Bill picked up his spoon, the elderly woman hesitated for a brief moment before doing the same. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel out of place. Across the restaurant, the waiter watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. He had served countless rich men before, had catered to their every demand, but never had he seen one treat a stranger like this. He swallowed hard, shame creeping into his chest. As Bill and the woman ate, the atmosphere in the restaurant changed. The usual hierarchy that dictated who was worthy and who wasn't had been shattered in a single moment. People were reminded of something they had forgotten, that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in character. When the meal ended, Bill signaled for the check. The manager himself rushed over, still flustered by the evening's events. "Mr. Gates," the manager stammered, "it's an honor to have you dine with us. Your meal is, of course, on the house?" Bill shook his head. "I appreciate the gesture, but I insist on paying." The manager hesitated, then nodded. The bill was placed on the table, and Bill pulled out his card. Before handing it over, he glanced at the waiter. "I believe you were serving this table earlier." The waiter stiffened, nodding quickly. "Why, yes, sir." Bill handed him the card and looked him straight in the eyes. "I hope today was a learning experience." The waiter swallowed hard. "Yes, sir, it was." Bill nodded. "Good." Then, As the waiter took the card and turned toward the payment station, Bill quietly slipped an envelope under the woman's plate. "Just a little something for you," he said with a small smile. The woman looked down, surprised. "Oh, Bill, you've already done enough." Bill chuckled. "Consider it a thank you for all the kindness you put into the world." The woman hesitated, then reached for the envelope. As she opened it, her eyes widened. Inside was a personal check for $50,000. Tears welled in her eyes. "Bill, I can't accept this." "You can," Bill said softly, "and you will. You've spent your whole life helping others. Let someone help you for a change." The woman clutched the envelope tightly, her hands shaking. "I don't know what to say." Bill smiled. "Just promise me one thing. Keep being you." As they stood up from the table, the entire restaurant, once indifferent, was now filled with silent admiration. The same people who had ignored the elderly woman before were now looking at her with new eyes. The power of a single act of kindness had changed everything. As Bill and the woman made their way toward the exit, the waiter stood by, holding the receipt. "Sir," he called after Bill hesitantly. Bill turned back. The waiter swallowed. "Thank you for showing me what real class looks like." Bill nodded. "Don't forget it." And with that, he and the elderly woman walked out into the crisp evening air, leaving behind a restaurant full of people who had just witnessed something they would never forget. Because that night, they had learned an important truth. Wealth isn't what's in your bank account. It's what's in your heart. As Bill Gates and the elderly woman stepped out of the restaurant, the cool evening air greeted them. The city lights twinkled above, casting a soft glow over the streets bustling with life. The woman clutched the envelope in her hands, her heart still racing from the generosity she had just received. She turned to Bill, her voice full of emotion. "I don't think I'll ever be able to thank you enough." Bill smiled, his eyes kind. "You already have. You've spent your life giving to others. Tonight was just the world's way of giving something back to you." The woman let out a shaky breath, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. "I'll use this to help my grandchildren. Maybe start a little fund for their education." Bill nodded approvingly. "That's a wonderful idea." Before they could part ways, the restaurant doors swung open behind them. The waiter, now looking visibly humbled, rushed outside. He hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. "Ma'am, Mr. Gates, he exhaled sharply, struggling to find the right words. "I wanted to apologize. I was wrong to judge you before even knowing who you were. I was rude, and I shouldn't have been." The elderly woman studied him for a moment, her gaze softening. "We all make mistakes, young man. What matters is that you learn from them." The waiter nodded, his face full of remorse. "I have more than you know." He turned to Bill, his voice quieter now. "Thank you for teaching me a lesson without making me feel small." Bill placed a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. "It's never about making someone feel small. It's about helping them see the bigger picture." The waiter swallowed hard and then did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small notepad, and tore out a slip of paper. "This might sound silly," he said, handing it to the elderly woman, "but here's my number. If you ever come back, please let me serve you. The right way this time." The woman smiled warmly and tucked the paper into her purse. "I'll hold you to that." With that, the waiter gave them a small nod and disappeared back inside, forever changed by the night's events. Bill glanced down the street and gestured toward a waiting car. "Can I give you a ride home?" The woman chuckled. "I think I'd like to take a walk instead. Tonight has been a lot to take in." Bill smiled. "Fair enough. Take care of yourself." As he stepped into the car and drove off into the night, the woman stood for a moment, looking up at the stars. She had come to the restaurant expecting nothing more than a simple meal. She left with a full heart, a brighter future, and a lesson she would never forget. And somewhere inside that restaurant, so did everyone else.